Just try to stabilize it as much as possible. Hey everybody, the chat comments are off right now. This is a really quick video I wanted to put together. It's kind of a little training module for our team because we have this new soil media collection project we're working on. But thought we would go live with it just to kind of show you some of the tools and equipment and how you might go about collecting a soil sample that you'll send off to the lab. So let's go ahead and jump right in. This is going to be a pretty quick video, hopefully around 10 to 15 minutes at most. And we're not going to go into too many great details, and it's a little windy out here, so you just have to bear with us. And this will be recorded and will be on our YouTube channel for you to view at any time. So welcome everybody to our live vlog here. We're at the South Suburban Cook Urban Ag Demonstration Site. I'm Zach Grant, local food small farm educator in Cook County. Sarah Becca is on the camera. And it's a lovely day. We just had a pretty hard freeze last night, but all of our cover crops and things that we have out here are intact. Everything in the high tunnel is good to go. So we're going to talk about taking soil samples today, and I'm not going to talk about which type of tests you should be getting or which lab you should be sending it to. This is just actually how you physically can take a sample out in the field and what that process looks like. I know we've discussed this with people in our training programs in the past. I'm sure you've seen other videos or gotten some guidance. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what to do. So you see in front of me here, I have a bunch of different equipment, and I put together a little test kit or a media collection kit. Sarah, if you want to come and zoom in on this for our project. And you don't have to do it this way, but this is the way that I'm doing it for our little project, just to kind of show you what we've got going on. So a couple things to start off with. Here is actually, so this is a form that we're using for our soil sample collection project. Whatever lab you're working with, they're going to have some sort of form, either digitally or something you can download and print out. So you can, fill out the information like the name of the sample, your farm address. Some of this stuff may or may not be on there. This is what our form looks like, because we're collecting from a certain number of farms on dates, and we're asking them a few other questions that we're going to have them fill in before we run the analysis. So the lab you may be working with might have some form like this for you to fill out. The important thing to remember is the sample ID. So for our form, our sample ID is the farm name. In this case, we're at Sosuco. And the date. That's super important. So you don't mix this up with other soil samples that you might do later in the season or that you've done in the past. So you'll make sure to have that on the form, but you'll also have it on the bag that you actually put your soil sample in. So I'm just using plastic bags today. You'll see I actually already have pre-written the sample ID and the date for what I'm about to collect on here. And this is what I'm going to use for our project, but you could use a Ziploc bag or a plastic bag to send it in the lab. Some labs actually you can purchase bags from them, or they'll send you sample bags that you can use to put your samples in to send to them, but you could also just use your own bag as well, so it doesn't really matter. For our project, we're actually doing something called the saturated media extract test. And that test actually requires the sample to be somewhat moist and warm. So when I'm collecting the sample, I want my sample to be somewhat moist and retain that moisture. Some labs will recommend for a normal soil test that it gets dried out, that you could let it dry out if you want. You don't have to, but some labs might recommend that. So yeah, just that's a little bit about that. Whatever lab you end up going with, they'll have information about the form for you to fill out and how they may want you to package it. For us, we're actually going to be collecting 2 to 4 cups of what we call a composite sample, but most soil labs will only require you to have maybe 2 cups at the most that you're actually collecting. Okay, so that's a little bit about the sort of background of forms and the containers to put it in. I'll explain a little bit about the equipment that you see here. In terms of our little soil collection kit. And you don't need this specialized equipment. You could just as well use the garden trowel or some sort of shovel, but they do make specialized soil sampling equipment. So I have a couple different probes here. Here's a 2-foot soil sampling probe, okay? And you'll see it has an opening on one end that's kind of sharp and a little open profile area that you can use to knock the sample out once you collect it. I've actually marked mine at 6 inches, because for this project and for most of my soil sampling, I'm usually just collecting a soil sample from the top 6 inches. So I've marked both of my smaller soil sampling probes at 6 inches. This is a much larger one right here. And this one actually already has markings in centimeters, but I've just marked it in 6 inches right there. This one also has a little plunger that you can use to push the sample out if it gets stuck. So this is a bit of a fancier soil probe collector, and you can actually collect more volume at any given time, which is really nice. And it has a little step bar on it. So if it's a little bit difficult to push it in the ground, if you get this, Sarah, you can actually use that to help push it into the ground. So, but you could just as well use a hand trowel or a shovel. But these are really useful for collecting soil samples, and they're relatively inexpensive. I think I got this one on Amazon for maybe like 15 or 20 bucks. So if you're, as a vegetable grower, a specialty grower, you know, I actually do a standard soil test. I'll do that twice a year. I'll do one in the spring and I will do one in the fall. And there may be some other testing in between, but you know, I do it enough personally and for work with extension that it justifies purchasing one of these. Okay, so let's talk about collecting the sample. Now that you know a little bit about the equipment, some of the forms, we're gonna use this space over here. But what I want to illustrate is how many samples you might need to collect. Okay, and there's going to be two different sort of terminologies here. We're going to talk about the overall composite sample. Okay, and you'll see what that looks like and what I mean by that. And then also different samples from different management zones. Okay, so for instance, here at Sosuko, we have a number of different management zones. So right now I'm standing in a native soil. This is actually a silt loam soil. Native soil, it's been tested. It doesn't have any contamination in it. Pretty quality ag soil. So this is one management zone. So this area and that area over there are all soil-based systems. And if Sarah keep panning over, the 3 beds to the left of that area, those are actually compost beds. So those are compost berm beds. It's a soil compost mixture. So that would be a different management zone from these native soil zones. Same thing with the raised beds over there. That's got the same compost soil mixture as the berm beds, and those would be different management zones from the area that I'm standing in. And then if you want to just pan around and look at the high tunnel, then of course there's the high tunnel. So the high tunnel would be another management zone. So here at our site, I actually have 3 distinctive management zones. So every time that I'm sending a sample to the lab, I'm actually sending 3 separate composite samples, one from the native soil, one from the compost berm beds, and then one from the high tunnel, because those are going to be, you're managing those differently. There might be different soil types, so you're going to get different information. So it depends on your site. At your site, you might just have, you know, compost beds that you grow in, and that's your only management zone. But maybe if you have a high tunnel and it's the same type of compost you're growing in the high tunnel, I would still maybe make those 2 different management zones. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So for our site, 3 different management zones. So I'm going to collect 3 composite samples that I would send off to the lab, or for our project that I would analyze with our SME project. So now that you know that, how do you collect a composite sample, and what do you mean by that? So if I'm going to collect 2 for each composite sample, this is a cup right here. I'm going to need at a minimum 2 cups of the composite sample. Okay, so what you're not doing is just taking like 2 cups and saying, okay, I'm going in here, grab my cup, 2 more cups from this area, got my soil sample. That's not what you want to do. You want to try to capture as much of the potential variability and sort of random error that there might be if you were to just do it from one area. So you need to collect a composite sample randomly, okay? So especially on these small areas, there isn't an exact science to it. At a large scale, they do like grid sampling with like specific coordinates, so they know exactly where they're sampling from at different times of year. For the purposes of small farms, backyard gardens, I would just suggest what we call walking a random, maybe Z pattern or some sort of random pattern. Okay, and I've already started to collect a little bit in here, as you see. But to collect the composite sample, there isn't a maximum number of little subsamples that you'd collect, but I would at least collect no less than 5 but as many as you want, to get up to the, 2-cup volume that you need to mix together and send off to the lab. So I've already collected a little bit, but what I'm going to do, let's say just, these 4 beds right here are my management area. I'm just going to randomly collect little bitty subsamples, put it in the bucket, and collectively that'll be my 1 composite subsample for this area. Okay, so I'll just start in any random place. I'm only going to go down to no deeper than that 6-inch mark. So I'll check that when I collect a sample, and you'll see I've got a little core of it. I'll just knock it into the bucket. Then I'll just randomly just keep moving down and collecting random sample just randomly. Okay. I mean, I suppose you could grid it out and collect it from somewhat the same place every time. But I just like to do it randomly. As in all research, you need to have this level of randomization in it in order for it to be more accurate. Okay. You don't want to just keep collecting from the same area. So I'm just going to keep randomly taking little bitty subsamples from the area. No real method to it, just randomly selecting. Now I said minimum of 5, but what you're really looking for is a certain volume. So in this case, you can see I've collected probably well more than 2 cups. So now that you have all your subsamples, this represents your composite sample for this one management zone. And I'd repeat this in the different areas that you have. So I'll just kind of mix it all up. And that's why it's nice to maybe have a 5-gallon bucket to do this, so you can collect a lot of it, mix it up, crush up any of the big chunks that you have. And then once you have it, homogenized, then if you only need 2 cups for the lab that you're sending it to, I have this Pyrex cup right here, got my bag ready. So I'm just going to go in and take 2 cups. 1 and about 2 right there. Okay. And there you have it. There's your single composite subsample from this management zone right here that's labeled, randomly selected, and ready to send off to the lab. So I would take this with my paperwork from my lab. It has the ID code on here and on the sheet from the lab, and I would package this up in a box and send it off to the lab. So we could talk about different labs at a different time, but I just wanted to just kind of briefly show you the process for collecting different composites samples. So again, you don't need to have all this specific equipment. You could just use any old bucket, measuring cup, trowel, or shovel. But the keys are definitely dividing up the different management zones, if you have different management zones, and then randomly collecting enough subsamples from that area, mixing in a bucket, and then collecting about 2 cups of that to send off to the lab. Okay, so that's pretty much it. What time are we at right now, Sarah? 15. Okay, so we'll go ahead and stop it right there. And thanks for everyone who joined live. I know this is kind of last minute, but we wanted to do this little training module for our crew as we begin collecting subsamples for our project. So stay tuned to our YouTube channel. Definitely subscribe to it. And we'll be doing a lot more of these this year live at the site, kind of until we can start getting back together in person. I think this will be a good substitute to see what we're doing. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you all soon, and have a great start to your spring. How many people? Oh, just 2? All right, cool. Perfect. All right, see you, everyone.